Let me tell you something about myself. My name is Caleb, and I used to believe that hard work could solve any problem. That's the kind of man I was raised to be. Someone who puts his head down, grinds, and trusts that everything will fall into place. It started early, this belief. My father was the type of man who never complained, never made excuses. He worked long hours at a factory, came home tired, but never failed to remind us that effort was the key to everything. If you wanted something, you worked for it. If something was broken, you fixed it. No shortcuts, no quitting. I took that lesson to heart. It shaped how I approached my education, my career, and most importantly, my marriage. I wasn't the kind of guy who coasted on charm. I didn't have the effortless swagger of men who could light up a room with a joke or a smile. But I had something else, dependability. When I met Clara, I thought I had hit the jackpot. She was the kind of woman who made you feel like life was brighter just because she was in it. The way she laughed, loud and unapologetic, made people turn their heads. It wasn't forced, wasn't measured. She simply laughed like the world didn't weigh her down. I admired that about her. I wasn't the most charismatic man, but I knew how to show love. I worked hard, I made plans for our future, and I prioritized her happiness. I didn't need to say, "I love you," a million times a day. I believed love was shown in actions, through consistency, through sacrifice. And for a while, I thought that was enough. I was wrong. Looking back, I can see the warning signs. They were there all along, hidden in the little things I brushed aside. But at the time, I thought love was about endurance, about pushing through the rough patches and coming out stronger. Now, I realize love isn't supposed to feel like a constant uphill climb. It isn't supposed to make you feel like you're proving your worth every single day. Love, real love, is supposed to be reciprocated. I wish I had learned that lesson earlier. Maybe then, I wouldn't have wasted so much time building a life with someone who was just waiting for me to disappear. That's the thing about trust. It makes you blind. You believe so deeply in the person you've chosen that you ignore the moments when they reveal who they really are. And Clara? She revealed herself in the most brutal way possible. She was drunk when she said it. "I'm just waiting for you to die so I can be free." She laughed, as if it were some casual joke. But I knew better. She meant it. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. That night, as she passed out in bed, I sat in the darkness and made a decision. By sunrise, I was gone. No notes. No goodbyes. Just gone. It was around dusk when I decided to make my move. There was something about Clara's growing distance that I couldn't ignore anymore. You know how it is when things feel off, but you convince yourself it's just a phase? That was me, telling myself it was just a rough patch, that she was stressed with work, or maybe tired of the usual routine. But the truth was starting to settle in my gut. I couldn't keep pretending that we were okay, that everything was fine. I noticed her more these days, how she spent hours on her phone, and how our conversations had gone from being full of life to just polite exchanges. I couldn't remember the last time we had an honest, deep conversation. I missed hearing her laugh, the kind of laugh that filled the room with joy. Now, it was just silence, or worse, awkward silence. But I didn't want to accept that. I refused to believe our marriage was slipping away, so I decided to do something about it. I thought back to when we first met, to those early days when everything felt exciting. We were constantly surprising each other, doing little things to show that we cared, and I wanted that back. I wanted to remind her of who we were before life got in the way. So I planned it out, something simple but meaningful. A dinner, just the two of us, no distractions. I spent the afternoon cooking her favorite meal, chicken parmesan with garlic mashed potatoes. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was special to us. It was the first dish I made for her when we started dating, and she had loved it. I wanted to remind her of those carefree, joyful times. I went all out. I set the table with candles, dimmed the lights, and even put together a playlist of her favorite songs. It was supposed to be a surprise, a way to show her that I was still here, still trying. I wanted her to know that I saw her, that I missed her, and that I was ready to fight for us. When she walked through the door that evening, I could tell she was surprised. The look in her eyes said it all. But there was a certain hesitation, like she wasn't sure how to react. She kissed me on the cheek and complimented the setup, but her voice was flat, not filled with the excitement I had hoped for. Still, I pushed through, trying to hold on to the belief that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. We sat down to eat, and for the first time in what felt like ages, the conversation flowed smoothly. There were moments where I almost believed we were back to where we started. She laughed, really laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and it gave me hope. For that fleeting moment, it felt like we were okay, like everything could go back to how it was. But then came the wine. 3 glasses in, Clara began to loosen up. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had a few drinks, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. She leaned back in her chair, a small smile on her lips. Her eyes, though a bit glassy, seemed to soften, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she was finally relaxing. I kept talking, keeping the mood light, trying to make her feel at ease. But then came the shift. She set her wine glass down, looked at me directly in the eyes, and said it, her voice slower than usual, but with a clarity that cut through everything else. "You're a nice guy, Caleb," she said. "That's why I'm here with you." I froze. I didn't know how to respond. Her words sounded wrong, almost like a consolation prize. Nice guy. Was that all I was to her? I forced a smile, trying to mask the sting of her words. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady, but my stomach already in knots. I had a sinking feeling, like I was about to hear something that would change everything. Her laugh wasn't the warm, light-hearted sound I loved. It was different, cold, almost mocking. "I mean, I've never really been attracted to you." "Not in that way," she said, almost casually, as if we were discussing the weather. It hit me like a freight train. I sat there, staring at her, trying to process the weight of what she had just said. But she didn't stop there. "No," she leaned forward, resting her chin in her hand, as though we were having a casual chat about some minor inconvenience. "You're sweet, safe, dependable," she went on. "But you're not my type." Her words didn't just sting. They shattered me. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, pouring every ounce of myself into this marriage, trying to make it work, and she was telling me that I wasn't enough. That I was just a placeholder, someone she settled for. But she wasn't finished. She leaned in even further, lowering her voice. "When I met him, my type, everything changed. I couldn't resist. I didn't need her to finish. I already knew." I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing, trying to grasp what was happening. She had just admitted that not only had she fallen out of love with me, but she had already found someone else. Someone who fit the image she had in her head of what she wanted. I wasn't that man. I was just a guy who worked hard, who loved her unconditionally, who thought that was enough. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't. I sat back, my mind blank. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad either. I just felt empty. This wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an attempt to explain herself. No, this was her justifying her actions, trying to make me understand why she had betrayed me. She didn't feel guilty. She wasn't sorry. And I wasn't going to beg for her to change her mind. So, I sat there, in that silence, and I let her talk. Because in the end, I didn't need to fight for her anymore. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to prove anything. That night, as she passed out in bed, oblivious to the damage she had done, I made my decision. By sunrise, I would be gone. No notes. No goodbyes. Just gone. There's something surreal about watching your life collapse in real time. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in fragments, in sentences that shouldn't be said aloud, in moments that rip through your reality like a jagged knife. I sat there, frozen, my hands resting on the table, my mind struggling to process the words that had just left Clara's lips. "I'm just waiting for you to die so I can be free." She had said it so casually, a little drunk, a little amused, as if she wasn't aware that she had just crushed the very foundation of our marriage in a single breath. I wanted to believe it was the alcohol talking, that she didn't mean it, that she would wake up the next morning, groggy and embarrassed, and apologize for her careless words. But deep down, I knew the truth. Drunken words are sober thoughts. She meant every syllable. She had spent the last 2 years of our marriage pretending to love me, pretending to care, pretending that she still saw a future with me. But now, with enough wine loosening her tongue, she had finally let the mask slip. She wasn't stuck in a difficult marriage. She was simply waiting. Waiting for time to erase me. Waiting for fate to remove the burden of my existence. Waiting for freedom. I sat there, staring at her across the candlelit table, watching as she laughed to herself, swirling the last of her wine in her glass like none of this mattered. And maybe to her it didn't. I had spent years building this life, working tirelessly to ensure we had everything we needed. I had sacrificed, endured, and convinced myself that my love was enough to hold us together. But in that moment, I realized something. I had spent all this time trying to be a good husband to a woman who was counting down the days until I was gone. And that realization, it didn't make me angry. It made me done. I studied her carefully as she sipped her wine, her lips curling into a slow, satisfied smile. She didn't even realize the weight of what she had just done. She had no idea that she had shattered me so thoroughly that there was no repairing it. I let the silence stretch between us, the flickering candlelight casting shadows over her face. The woman I had once adored, the woman I had spent years trying to keep happy, had just admitted she wanted me out of the picture. No rage boiled inside me. No heartbreak threatened to consume me. Just clarity. I knew in that instant that I wasn't staying another day in this house. She passed out an hour later. The wine did its job, dragging her into unconsciousness, leaving her sprawled on the bed without a care in the world. I stood in the doorway, watching her sleep, feeling a strange kind of calm settle over me. She had no idea that when she woke up, I would be gone. No notes. No goodbyes. Just gone. I turned away from her and walked into the darkened house, the home I had spent years building for us. The walls felt different now, emptier somehow, like I had finally seen the truth hiding behind them. I walked through the living room, where we used to sit together, where I used to believe we were happy. I ran my fingers along the dining table, where I had just tried, really tried, to rekindle something that had died long ago. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was simply done being the man she was waiting to bury. And by sunrise, I would vanish. I grabbed a bag from the hallway closet and moved through the house with quiet purpose. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't frantic. This wasn't an emotional reaction. It was a decision. A final one. I packed only what I needed. Essentials. Clothes. My important documents. Everything else? She could have it. The furniture, the pictures, the little trinkets we had collected over the years. None of it mattered anymore. They were just remnants of a life that had never really been mine to begin with. I logged into our bank accounts next, sitting in the dim glow of my laptop screen. The sight of our shared finances made me pause for just a second. She had been spending more than I realized. Dinners, shopping sprees, hotel stays. Hotel stays. I didn't need to look at the details. I already knew. I moved quickly after that, transferring everything into my name, securing my finances so she wouldn't have access to another dime. She had been waiting for me to be gone? Well, now she would have her wish. Just not in the way she expected. I called my lawyer next, leaving a message that couldn't have been clearer. File the papers. I want everything finalized as soon as possible. And make sure she doesn't get a cent more than she deserves. Then, I made one final call, to my family. If she calls, don't answer. If she asks about me, tell her nothing. As far as she's concerned, I don't exist anymore. They didn't question it. They knew me well enough to understand that if I was cutting ties this cleanly, there was no coming back. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the windows, I was standing at the front door, staring at the house one last time. This wasn't a home anymore. It was just a place where I had once lived. A place where I had once believed in something that never truly existed. I exhaled slowly, reached for the door handle, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, cool, filled with the quiet hum of a world that was just waking up. Behind me, Clara was still asleep, completely unaware that when she opened her eyes, her world would be different. That I would be gone. No notes. No goodbyes. Just gone. I stood at the doorway of our bedroom, watching Clara sleep. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, like she hadn't just shattered the last remaining pieces of our marriage hours ago. I should have been angry. I should have felt something, but all I felt was done. It wasn't the kind of done where you slam doors and scream and demand answers. No, this was something deeper. It was the kind of done that left you silent, detached. I had spent years trying, years convincing myself that effort was enough, that love could be sustained by endurance. But love, real love, should never feel like something you have to convince someone to return. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't trying anymore. I turned away from her and walked through the house, my feet making no sound against the floor. I wasn't sneaking. There was no need. She wouldn't wake up. Not yet. The weight of her words still hung in the air, poisoning every memory I had ever made in this house. I'm just waiting for you to die so I can be free. She had laughed when she said it. A quiet, amused kind of laugh, like I was a joke she had already made peace with. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the remnants of the dinner I had spent hours preparing. The empty wine glasses, the candle wax hardened on the tablecloth. A night that had been meant to save us had only proven what I had been too blind to see. There was nothing left to save. I sat down at the table, not because I was tired, but because I needed to absorb it. The finality of it. I was leaving. Not in a week. Not in a few days. Not after some long drawn-out fight where I begged her to explain herself. No. By sunrise, I would be gone. I wasn't the kind of man who acted on impulse. I didn't throw fits, didn't make emotional decisions. I was the type of man who moved with purpose. So, I moved. I walked to the hallway closet, pulling out a duffel bag. I wasn't going to pack everything. I wasn't taking any unnecessary baggage, physical or emotional. I grabbed the essentials. My passport, my wallet, a week's worth of clothes. Everything else? It didn't matter. The house, the furniture, the shared life we had built. It all belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. The man who had stayed. The man who had believed. The man who had waited for her to love him back. He was gone. I made my way to the study next. Opened my laptop. Logged into our bank accounts. And that was when I saw it. The withdrawals. They weren't just recent. They stretched back months. Large sums missing from our joint account, credit card charges at high-end restaurants, spa appointments, weekend hotel stays. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening into fists. Not because I was shocked, but because I had been so blind. The woman who had told me she was waiting for me to die hadn't just been waiting. She had been living. Living at my expense. I could have stopped there. Could have let her keep the money. Let her have the comfort of what she had stolen from me. But she didn't deserve comfort. I started transferring the funds. Slowly at first, then all at once. Every dollar that had my name attached to it, every investment I had made, gone from her reach. I wasn't leaving her with a single cent more than she was legally entitled to. By the time she woke up, she wouldn't just find me missing. She would find her life reset. The house? She could keep it. But without my income, she'd struggle to maintain it. The accounts? Frozen. The investments? Liquidated into a trust she couldn't touch. And the moment she called to demand answers, she'd realize there was no one left to answer her. I sent an email to my lawyer, marked urgent. File the papers. No delays. No negotiations. I didn't need to read his response. I already knew what it would say. Are you sure you don't want to talk to her first? I had never been more sure of anything in my life. I picked up my phone next, scrolling to my family's contact list. If she calls, don't answer. If she asks about me, tell her nothing. As far as she's concerned, I don't exist anymore. I could already picture my mother crying when she read the message. She had always believed in second chances. But there was no second chance here. Clara had made her choice. And now, so had I. I packed the last of my things, slipping my wedding ring into the bedside drawer. Not as a sentimental gesture, but as a final, silent statement. She could have it. The weight of it didn't belong to me anymore. I paused at the front door. One last glance at the house. The home that had once held dreams, now nothing more than a place I had outgrown. No note. No goodbyes. No explanations. Because really, what was left to say? By sunrise, I vanished. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. The air outside was crisp, the quiet hum of the world waking up barely registering in my ears as I shut the door behind me. I didn't look back. Not once. There was nothing left for me in that house. The memories, the sacrifices, the countless nights I had stayed up convincing myself that love was something you earned through endurance. It all died the moment she said those words. I'm just waiting for you to die so I can be free. I had spent the night watching her sleep, numb to the woman I once thought I knew. I had walked through every room of our house, the house I had worked so hard to afford, letting each memory lose its grip on me. I had packed what mattered, and by sunrise, I was gone. No notes, no goodbyes, because some things don't deserve closure. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel as I took a long, steady breath. It felt strange, like I was breaking some invisible rule, like I should be hesitating. But there was no hesitation left in me. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a sound that had never felt as satisfying as it did in that moment. The first step of a man walking away from the wreckage. The neighborhood was still asleep as I drove through the familiar streets, past the grocery store where Clara and I used to argue about what brand of coffee to buy, past the park where she had once held my hand like I was her entire world. Had it all been a lie? Or had she simply outgrown the illusion before I did? I didn't have the answers, and for the first time, I didn't care. The next stop was my lawyer's office. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't need to. File the papers. That was all I said when I walked into his office, my voice steady, my face unreadable. He blinked, adjusting his tie as if he expected me to say more. Caleb, are you sure you don't want to? I don't want to talk about it. I cut him off. Just file them. Make sure she gets what she's legally entitled to, nothing more. His eyes narrowed slightly, probably sensing that there was more to this than a simple marital dispute. But he nodded. All right, I'll get the paperwork ready. Do you want to serve her personally, or send it to her? I won't be around. That's when his expression shifted, the realization sinking in. You're leaving? I already have. The next call was to my accountant. Clara had lived comfortably because I made it that way. That ended today. I need every account frozen that has her name attached to it, I instructed, standing outside on the sidewalk, the morning sun creeping up behind me. Any investment tied to both of us, I want it liquidated and moved. My priority is making sure she doesn't get another cent of my money beyond what's in that divorce settlement. There was a pause on the other end. Then, a slow exhale. Caleb, you do realize that when she sees all this, she's going to go ballistic, right? I almost smiled. Let her. Let her wake up in the house I had walked away from. Let her check the bank accounts and find nothing. Let her realize in real time that the man she had been waiting to die had just erased himself from her life instead. Poetic, in a way. After handling the financials, I made one last stop. My parents' house. I knew they would have questions. That was unavoidable. But they deserved to hear it from me, not from Clara's inevitable frantic calls when she realized what had happened. My mother was already awake when I pulled into the driveway, standing by the porch with a concerned expression. She knew. Mothers always know. Caleb, she called out as I stepped out of the car. I didn't answer right away, just walked up the steps, letting the weight of the past 12 hours settle between us. I left, I said simply. Her breath hitched slightly, but she didn't look surprised. My father stepped out next, his gaze sharp, assessing. You sure about that, son? I nodded. I'm not going back. The silence stretched. Then, finally, my mother sighed, reaching out to squeeze my arm. Do you want to tell us what happened? No, not now. Maybe not ever. She studied me for a long moment before nodding in quiet understanding. All right, she said softly. We won't push. I glanced at my father, expecting him to have something to say, some fatherly wisdom to offer. But all he did was give me a slow, approving nod. Good, he said. And that was that. I stayed long enough for a cup of coffee, long enough for my mother to fuss over me like she used to when I was a kid. Then, I stood up, grabbed my bag, and turned to leave. Where will you go? She asked. I gave her a small, tired smile. Anywhere but back. By the time I was back in my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. There's something freeing about walking away from something that no longer serves you. I had spent so much time trying to be a good husband, trying to deserve love, trying to prove that I was enough. But love isn't something you prove. It's something that's given willingly. And Clara had never truly given it to me. She had been waiting for me to die so she could be free. Instead, I left, and I was the one who found freedom. By the time Clara woke up, I was already hours away. By the time she reached for her phone, my number was already changed. By the time she checked the bank accounts, she would realize the life she had taken for granted was no longer hers to coast through. And when she sat there, staring at the empty house, with nothing but the weight of her own words echoing back at her, "I'm just waiting for you to die so I can be free," she would finally understand something. I wasn't dead, but I was gone. And for the first time in a long, long time, I had never felt more alive. Clara woke up groggy, her head pounding from the wine she drowned herself in the night before. She stretched lazily, blinking at the morning light streaming through the curtains. She rolled over, expecting the familiar warmth of my presence beside her. But there was nothing, just cold, empty sheets. She frowned, sitting up slowly, rubbing her temples. "Caleb," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Silence. That was the first thing she noticed. The unnatural stillness of the house. Usually, by this time, I would already be moving around, either getting ready for work or making coffee. Even on weekends, she would hear the occasional clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the sound of the shower running, or the low murmur of the morning news. But now, nothing. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, still sluggish from the alcohol, her mind struggling to put together what felt off. The night before was a blur. She remembered the dinner, the candlelit setting, the effort I had put in. She remembered laughing, drinking, and then her stomach twisted as hazy memories of the conversation resurfaced. Had she really said those words? "I'm just waiting for you to die so I can be free." A laugh had followed. Her own laugh. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "No, it wasn't that serious. He knows I was drunk. He knows I didn't mean it." But a gnawing unease settled in her chest. Something wasn't right. She pulled on her robe and padded down the hallway, her bare feet making soft sounds against the wooden floor. The kitchen was spotless. No sign of breakfast, no coffee brewing, no dishes in the sink. The remnants of last night's dinner were gone. She frowned. "Caleb," she called again, louder this time. Still, nothing. She glanced toward the living room, expecting to see me sitting there, maybe reading, maybe waiting for her to wake up so we could talk about the night before. But the couch was empty. Her breath came a little faster now. She turned and headed toward my study. The door was ajar. She nudged it open, half expecting to find me buried in paperwork, avoiding her, punishing her with silence. But there was no one there. The chair was neatly pushed in. The desk was clear. And that's when she noticed it, the space on the bookshelf where my laptop used to be. She blinked, stepping closer. Her fingers ran over the empty shelf, as if touching it would somehow explain why it was bare. Then her gaze swept over the room, taking in the small but significant absences. My favorite pen was gone. The stack of documents I had always kept on the desk, missing. She turned sharply, heart hammering in her chest, and rushed back toward the bedroom. The closet doors swung open, revealing a neat, half-empty space. My clothes were gone. The sight sent a sharp jolt of panic through her. Her hands trembled as she flung open drawer after drawer. No socks, no ties, no watch. Everything that belonged to me, gone. Her breathing became erratic as she turned toward the bedside table. She reached for her phone, needing to call me, to demand an explanation, to insist that she hadn't meant what she said. But before she could unlock it, her gaze landed on the nightstand. And that's when she saw it. My wedding ring. It sat there, small and unassuming, glinting under the morning light. That was when she knew. I wasn't coming back. A strangled sound left her throat as she stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the dresser for support. She hit the call button on her phone, scrolling frantically through her recent contacts, pressing my name. The call didn't even ring. A robotic voice filled the silence. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Her heart stopped. She tried again. Same message. She tried texting. Message failed to send. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice shaking as she hurried down the hall. She reached for the landline, punching in my number, pressing the phone to her ear. Disconnected. Her chest tightened, her fingers curling into the receiver as a deep, gnawing panic settled in. She dropped the phone onto the table with a thud and ran back to the bedroom, grabbing her laptop, logging into the bank accounts. Her breath hitched as she scanned the screen. Balance, $0. Her mouth went dry. She checked the savings account. $0. The investment portfolio. Gone. Her fingers trembled as she refreshed the page, willing it to be some kind of glitch. But it wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. A strangled sob clawed its way up her throat as she fumbled for her credit card, pulling up the online statements. Declined. One by one, she checked each account, each card, each financial safety net she thought she had. Everything was gone. The full weight of what had happened hit her like a freight train. I hadn't just left. I had erased myself from her life. She collapsed onto the floor, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to stay. I was supposed to forgive. I was supposed to pretend her words meant nothing, that she hadn't just admitted she was waiting for me to be out of her way. But I hadn't stayed. I had left. And I had taken everything with me. She curled her fingers into the carpet, a choked sob escaping her lips. She had thought she had control. She had thought she had time. But time had run out. And now, she was the one left waiting. Waiting in an empty house. Waiting with no money, no explanations, no lifeline. Waiting for a man who had already moved on. At first, she refused to believe it. She sat there on the bedroom floor, staring at the empty closet, at my wedding ring resting on the nightstand, at the bank accounts that no longer existed. This was a mistake, a temporary glitch, a misunderstanding. But as the minutes ticked by, the truth settled in her bones like ice. I was gone, and I wasn't coming back. Her breath quickened, her fingers curling around her phone like it was the last tether to reality. She pressed my contact again, hoping, praying that somehow, the call would go through this time. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Her hands clenched into fists. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, no, no. She tried again. Same response. She tried texting. Message failed to send. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled to my parents' number, pressing the call button. It rang twice before my mother answered. Clara. Just my name. No warmth, no concern. She swallowed hard. Where is Caleb? A pause. A heavy one. Then, he doesn't want to speak to you. The words landed like a slap. Clara blinked, her mouth opening and closing as if struggling to comprehend what was happening. What do you mean? Please, I just need to talk to him. He left, Clara, and he doesn't want to be found. Her stomach twisted. You know where he is, she whispered. Please, just tell me. Don't call here again. Click. The line went dead. Clara sat there, frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. No, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to be angry, sure. Hurt, maybe. But I wasn't supposed to leave. Not like this. I was supposed to fight, to yell, to demand explanations. But I had done none of those things. I had simply disappeared. And now, she was alone. She launched into action, dialing friends, mutual acquaintances, anyone who might know something. Have you seen Caleb? Did he mention anything about leaving? Do you know where he went? Every answer was the same. No one had seen me. No one had heard from me. No one knew where I was. She paced the living room, her nerves unraveling with each passing minute. He wouldn't just leave, would he? Her stomach twisted violently. Yes, he would. And he did. And she had pushed him to it. By mid-afternoon, she was frantic. She went through the house, searching for any clue, any sign of where I might have gone. She rifled through drawers, checked the garage, even peeked under the bed as if I had left a goodbye note somewhere, something to explain myself. But there was nothing. No note, no explanation, just absence. And then, something worse. She sat at the kitchen table, breathing heavily, her mind racing, when she pulled out her laptop again. She had checked the bank accounts already. She had seen the zeros. But maybe, just maybe, She had overlooked something. Maybe there was something left. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, logging into our financial accounts, searching for any sign that she wasn't completely alone. The reality hit her like a sledgehammer. Everything had been moved. Not stolen. Not frozen. Just gone. All legal. All carefully planned. She felt sick. She scrolled through transaction records, her pulse pounding against her ribs as she took in the damage. The mortgage, no longer being paid from our joint account. The investments, liquidated. The shared credit card, closed. The safety net she had assumed would always be there, gone. Her hands shook as she clicked through page after page, realizing with dawning horror that I had taken everything with me. This wasn't just a man leaving his marriage. This was a man erasing himself from her world. She gripped the table, trying to steady her breathing. How had I done it so fast? Had I been planning this? Had I known all along? No, it wasn't possible. I had been fine. I had cooked dinner. I had tried to make things work. But then she remembered. Her own voice, slurred from wine. I'm just waiting for you to die so I can be free. A bitter, painful laugh bubbled up in her throat. She had done this. She had pushed me into disappearing. And now, for the first time in her life, Clara was the one who had been abandoned. Evening came, and she still had no answers. Her phone sat on the table, useless. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. She was alone. And she was beginning to realize something. It wasn't just that I had left. It was how I left. No screaming. No begging. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence. A clean, precise, final exit. And that silence. It was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She went back through her contacts, scrolling desperately, her pride long gone. Then, she saw a name. Jared. One of our mutual friends. Her last chance. She pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. Clara? Jared, she exhaled, barely keeping her voice steady. Please, please tell me you know where Caleb is. A pause. A long, uncomfortable pause. Then, Clara, he doesn't want to be found. Her stomach twisted. Jared, please. Just tell me if he's okay. Tell me if he's coming back. Her voice cracked, and for the first time since this nightmare began, tears burned at the back of her eyes. I just need to talk to him. Another pause. Then, you don't get to do that. The words were sharp, cutting through her like a blade. You don't get to say what you said, and then act surprised when he leaves. Her throat tightened. Jared's voice was softer now. He's done, Clara. She squeezed her eyes shut. No notes. No goodbyes, Jared continued. He made sure of that. A broken sob escaped her lips. You wanted freedom? Jared said quietly. Well, now you have it. Click. The call ended. Clara stared at the phone in her trembling hands, her breath coming in uneven gasps. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to stay. I was supposed to forgive. But I had walked away. And worse, I had done it without a word. That was what gutted her the most. Not the money. Not the empty accounts. Not even the loneliness. But the silence. I had made my decision. And now, she had to live with it. Alone. At first, Clara thought it was a joke. That I was playing some kind of elaborate, childish game to teach her a lesson. She told herself I would cool down. That I'd come back. That eventually, I'd get over it. That's what people did when they loved someone, right? They got over things. She expected anger. Rage. A confrontation where I demanded to know why she had said those words, why she had looked me in the eye with nothing but casual amusement and told me she was waiting for me to die. But she never got that. All she got was silence. And silence? It's louder than screaming. The first week, she was defiant. Told herself I was being dramatic. Told herself she still had control. She still had the house. She still had her name. She still had options. But then the bank account stayed empty. The bills started piling up. The reality of my departure finally started to hit her. Because I hadn't just left. I had taken everything with me. She checked every account, zero. She called every credit card company, closed. She tried to pull from our investments, liquidated and locked under my name. Her safety net was gone. She had spent years using me. using me as a provider, a convenience, a placeholder until something better came along. But now, she had nothing. The next month was a disaster. She tried to sell the house, but the mortgage was in my name. She tried to open a new credit card, but her financial history was a mess. Turns out when you're living off someone else's income, you don't build a foundation of your own. She reached out to friends, looking for a way out. But something happened she didn't expect. No one cared. The same friends she had spent years impressing, the same ones who cheered her on when she flirted with other men, who listened to her complain about how boring I was, they were gone. Turns out, when you have no status, no resources, and no value, people don't stick around. And for the first time in her life, she was alone. Truly, utterly alone. Meanwhile, I was learning what it meant to be free. For the first time in years, I woke up without a weight in my chest, without dread settling into my bones the second I opened my eyes. There was no more wondering if today was the day she would finally respect me. No more waiting for affection that never came. No more pouring myself into someone who didn't deserve me. I had my own apartment now. It wasn't much. Just a simple one-bedroom with an old wooden floor that creaked when I walked across it. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, but it was mine. Every inch of it, every choice I made about it. It all belonged to me. No fake smiles. No forced conversations. No wondering if the woman beside me was secretly counting down the days until she was free of me. For the first time in my life, I was alone, and it felt good. I threw myself into rebuilding, not just my career, not just my finances, but me, the man I had been before Clara, the man who had dreams, who had ambitions outside of just providing for someone who didn't love him. I started saying no to things that didn't serve me. No to overworking myself for companies that didn't care about me. No to friendships that only existed when I was the one putting in the effort. No to living for anyone but myself. And little by little, I started coming back to life. I picked up my old hobbies, the ones I had abandoned for her. I started traveling. Not far, not at first. Just little road trips, places I had always wanted to see but never made time for. I reconnected with people, real friends. People who didn't just use me for what I could provide. I found joy again. And the best part? I didn't miss her. Not even a little. But Clara? She missed me. I knew because she started trying to reach me again. First, it was just texts. Then emails. Then phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize. They all went unanswered. Because there was nothing left to say. Then she showed up at my parents' house, banging on the door, demanding to know where I was. My mother looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You're not welcome here." She tried to cry, tried to tell my parents she had made a mistake. But my father just shook his head. "You didn't make a mistake, Clara," he said. "You made a choice." And that was the end of it. Months passed. I kept moving forward, and her life kept crumbling. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had sold everything she could. The house? Gone. The luxury lifestyle? Over. The friends? Disappeared. She had spent years treating me like a backup plan, assuming that no matter what, I would always be there. But the thing about people like Clara is that they never think about the consequences. She wanted freedom? Well, now she had it. Just not the way she imagined. The last time I heard from her, it wasn't a call. It wasn't a message. It was a letter. Handwritten. As if writing it down could undo everything she had done. It was long, rambling. She talked about how she had changed, how she had realized what she had lost, how she understood now what I had done for her all those years. She said she was sorry, that she missed me, that she needed me. I stared at that letter for a long time. Then I folded it up, walked outside, and threw it in the fire. Because I didn't need her apologies. I didn't need her regret. I didn't need anything from her. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. No notes, no goodbyes. Just gone. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be.